name is Greg.
And I'm Isabel.
And we are here to introduce you to a web series we're doing called Doc Talks.
Mm-hmm.
What is Doc Talk?
Doc Talks are just our little documented talks on subjects that we feel like God has been growing us in that just happen to, for now, take place on a doc.
A doc about docs. Two things.
The purpose of us doing this is to highlight kind of what God has been doing in our lives and things He's been teaching us. And as we learn, we want you to learn. So we want to share what God has been doing in our lives with you guys. And we would also like to share just different aspects of our ministry and some of the topics, that we'll talk about is like adoption, foster care,
Trauma,
orphan care. Yep. So, we've just learned a lot in our history, so we would like to share that with you guys.
Mm-hmm. And just to give you a little bit of a history of who we are, we've been married for 25 years as of this month.
Yes,
pretty
August.
Exciting.
Yes.
And we have 10 children, 4 of whom are biological, 6 are adopted. They were adopted
sibling groups of 3
through the Children's Aid Society.
And along with our busy family, we also run 2 full-time ministries, one of which is
Safe Families,
which Greg is the director of in London.
Regional director
in London. And Little by Little, which is a orphan prevention project in Haiti. So Little by Little, what we do with Little by Little is we work with families that have tried to leave their children at the orphanage due to poverty, and then we offer job opportunities so they can keep their families together. And Safe Families
offers temporary care to children whose parents are in a crisis situation.
So we're very passionate about family, and we're very passionate believing that children belong in families, not in institutions, not stuck in foster care. Children need permanency, they need a family to grow up with. So it's kind of driven, obviously, where we've ended up in our ministries and what we do. So we would like to, in the future, share a little more detail about each of those ministries. So God really put it on our hearts to keep families together early on in our walk with Him. And actually that's pretty closely tied to my personal testimony. I wasn't a believer or follower in Jesus until I was about 30 years old. And I was actually pregnant at the time, very pregnant with our 4th biological child. And we had started attending a church where we lived. And for me, I just had never really known people who had a personal relationship with Jesus. So it was really my first exposure to people who had a relationship with Jesus, who spoke like they had a relationship with Jesus. And it just blew my mind. And I knew that I had been missing that all my life. And I just, after meeting with some friends once, after they left, I kind of fell to my knees and I just asked the Lord for that relationship. It just was put so deeply in my heart that I needed that kind of a personal relationship with the Lord that I had just never known before. And so when I was pregnant, my 4th child, 30 years old, I was 30 years old, I asked the Lord to just change my life and just become a part of my everyday life. And I didn't even really know what that meant. And so it was a journey in learning. 3 weeks after I'd given birth to our daughter Bethany, I started hemorrhaging at home, and it was pretty intense. And I had to go to the hospital, and I didn't want to go. I had an irrational fear, just that if I went in, then something bad was going to happen. And I talked to a bunch of friends and a whole bunch of people, and everybody kind of assured me that, it would be fine. It wasn't really a big procedure. And so that was actually the first time I wasn't getting any peace from anything. anybody else told me. But it was the first time as a Christian that I fell on my knees and I prayed. And I asked God for help, because I couldn't stay at home because I literally was going to bleed to death at home. And I was terrified to go to the hospital. So as a new believer, that was the first time I fell to my knees and I prayed to God, and this supernatural peace fell over me like a blanket. And it was just something in my whole life that I had never felt before. It was so awesome. And again, it was so supernatural. My life before Christ was very chaotic, my whole life. So this is just like a peace that I had never felt before. So I did go to the hospital after that, filled with the peace of the Lord. When I went under had to get a D&C. There was some retained placenta, and I went under in peace. And then when I woke up, I noticed Greg was at the foot of my bed, and I could tell that he was very distraught, that he had been crying and he was very upset and worried. So immediately I knew that something had gone wrong. I just looked at him and I just kind of said, "Can I?" And he looked at me and said, "No." So apparently while I was under, and they were doing the D&C, my uterus ruptured and I almost died on the table. I lost a lot of blood, had blood transfusion and the whole bit. And so my worst fear, that was an irrational fear, actually came true. But God, in his grace and mercy, gave me peace before I went, and I went out with his peace, and I woke up with his peace, and I just knew that it was okay, even though this was such a huge fear of mine. We did want to have more children. Like, we didn't think at number 4 we were done. We did want to have a big family. So this was a big deal to us, and I felt like God had given me that peace to kind of know that he had a plan. 3 weeks later, it wasn't even that long later, I looked in the newspaper and there was an ad for the Children's Aid Society that they needed more adoptive parents. And I was just like, and it just really caught me. And so I called the Children's Aid. I really at that time had no idea. I had no idea anything about the foster care system. I didn't know how many kids were in care. We knew nothing. Mm-hmm. And so we went to the information session, and we just both really felt that this is what God wanted us to do. Mm-hmm. And again, we were new believers. So for us to have these desires, like just these feelings like God wants us to do this. This was so outside of who we were. You know, we were very selfish, self-focused.
Self-reliant, self-sufficient.
We were what you would call today preppers, I guess, right? We didn't have that word back then. We were just like survivalists, living on our 50 acres, milking our goats and making granola and having babies, you know, all that stuff. So we were very self-sufficient, self-reliant. So all these things that God was putting on our heart was so out of our realm and who we were. Mm-hmm. So to me, it was just very clear that it was God, and it was supernatural, just his supernatural grace and mercy moving us forward. And that is how we got involved with foster care and adoption. So when we had taken our course and gone to the Children's Aid, we literally just asked them, "What is your need for kids in care?" And their response was, "Well, we need homes for teenagers and sibling groups." And at that time, our children were very young, so we didn't feel like we had the capacity to take care of teenagers. Mm-hmm. But we did immediately when we heard that kids were being separated from their siblings, like they had already gone through some sort of trial and trauma with their families. They've lost their parents due to some reason or another, have lived difficult lives already. The last thing they needed was to be separated from their brothers and sisters. So that's kind of where God really touched our hearts early on in keeping families together, was putting it on our heart to keep siblings together within the foster care system. It was a hard journey, but it was worth it. And now we are, yes, in the end, we can't imagine our lives without the kids that God has brought to us and that we've adopted.
And in the midst of all of that trial and upheaval, we are very grateful and very blessed by the fact that our children have always been supporters of the walk we were in. So when children would come into our home that were on a course to be adopted, and then some disruption happened and they ended up going elsewhere to relatives, or kin or whatever, we would always ask our children, okay, do you still want to go forward in this? Because we know that just like our hearts get broken, their hearts get broken too when they get attached to these kids that come into our homes. And thankfully, we're really grateful for the fact that each and every time they've always said, yes,
let's do it again.
Keep doing it. Yeah. And now we have a whole new group of kids, the younger kids in our home, who still talk about wanting to adopt and have more kids come into care. And we're like, probably not.
So it's quite amazing. Like, we had no idea what God had in store for us, or what God had in store for us, when I'd gone into the hospital that day. And it was, such a trial for us to not be able to have more of our own kids. But we could have never imagined what God was going to do, and that He never intended us to stop having children. He just intended to grow our family in a totally different way.
So that's a little bit about who we are and about where we came from, how God used so many different things to push us into the ministries that we're involved in, and about our families. And it's been pretty exciting, and it's been, a lot of ups and downs, but we'll get a little bit more into that. So, you know what? Join us next time as we talk about one of the endeavors that we're involved in, and that is Isabel and her journey to Haiti and the formation of Little by Little, and how God brought her first to work in an orphanage, pretty much, to end up being in a place where now she wants to work to get children out of orphanages and promote job creation over orphanage models.
Children belong in families.
So join us next time for number 2.
That's 4.
Long live the heart.